Okay, and I think we are now live. So hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. For those new here, my name's Nicki, I'm an author and editor, and I post videos here on YouTube about writing, editing, reading, and all the other things I love. And it's the reading we're here for today's vlog, because it's the end of the month, so I'm just going to share with you a very quick overview of what I've been reading over the last few weeks. We've got a few books to get through, so I am going to kick straight off. I might just switch legs. There we go, get a bit more comfortable and get rid of this banner out of our way. Okay, so as I said, I've got a few things to go through with you. So the first one I read, this is a book I read actually a few months ago, but there was just an embargo on reviewing before publication. So it's Trio by William Boyd. I've read a few books by William Boyd in the past, which I've enjoyed, principally Armadillo is my favourite. And Trio it's a good read. I gave it 4 stars. It's set in the world of filmmaking, and we have, as the title suggests, 3 POVs, if you like, from different characters in the middle of making this film and looking at their difficulties in life and their situations and how they're dealing with them. It was an interesting drama, but the reason I gave it 4 and not 5 is that it didn't absolutely captivate me in the way, say, Armadillo did. I read it, I was glad I read it, but I wouldn't feel the need to rush out and buy a copy to keep on my shelf to reread or anything like that. So it was a good piece of fiction, set around the 60s, so depends if you call that historic or not, but perhaps just a little look back at a different time period and how people were dealing with making movies in those days. So if that kind of thing interests you, give it a look. Next up, I read a couple of NetGalley reads. So the first of those is Lava Red, Feather Blue by Molly Ringle. So this is a fantasy fairy story, fae if you like, and a kind of blend of humans and fays and a bit of adventure and romance going on. I gave this 3.5 stars. I thought the premise was really strong. I loved the idea, but there was just something that didn't quite come together for me overall. I think I expected a little bit more than I got in the end, and I'm just reluctant to say too much about why, because it would be spoilery, and I don't want to spoil anything, but perhaps just a little bit cliched and things at times. So if you enjoy stories with the fae and magic, traveling to fairyland and various things, then it's worth having a look at. As I said, it wasn't a bad piece, it just wasn't as good as I was looking for. Next up, I read Little Devils and Other Stories by Remizov. So this is a short story collection by the Russian author, early 20th century Russian author. So a little bit later than I usually read. A lot of my Russian reading is firmly based in the 19th century. So I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4.5 stars. It's an interesting collection of stories, many of which have a kind of element of Russian folklore about them. I really appreciated the little introduction paragraphs to each story that gave you a bit of background on what was going on at the time, what was the inspiration for the piece, which was helpful as I was reading. And so definitely, if you're interested in that early 20th century Russian literature, this is a really nice collection of tales in sort of symbolistic, I guess, vein. Next up, sticking with NetGalley actually, I read The Sex and Sexuality in Georgian Britain non-fiction book by Rendell. This was a 4-star read for me. Excuse me. I've read quite a few books on Georgian England, several of which go into sex and sexuality at the time. So for me, most of the information in this book was not new. It was just going over stuff I already knew. But it was nicely presented, easy reading, and if you're new to the topic, then this is definitely a good place to start. Next up, a book I bought, The Lives of Saints by Leigh Bardugo. So this is the latest book in the sort of Grishaverse universe, and essentially it's a collection of tales purporting to be the book that is mentioned in the Shadow and Bone trilogy that Alina reads. I thought it was nice. It was well illustrated. There were some fun tales. And if it's not something you'd pick up and read if you're not already familiar with Grishaverse, though, it's definitely one for fans and just adds to the world building, I guess, in the main novels. So I gave this 4 stars. I think, as I said, it's not somewhere you start if you haven't read Leigh Bardugo before, but if you're already a fan, it's a nice addition to your Grisha library, if you like. Next up, I read a book from the library called Miss Ice Sandwich by Kawakawi and Miko. So this is a Japanese contemporary female author. Miss Ice Sandwich is about a coming-of-age tale, in a way, of the young boy who has fallen in love with the slightly unconventional young woman who runs the sandwich section in his local store. And again, I don't want to spoiler this book too much, but it's a sweet story. I think she gets that viewpoint of that guy across, the main character across, really well. We get a great sense of him and his age without it being too simplistic. And it's still emotional. It's a kind of bittersweet and emotional story in a way, but not too heavy going, if you see what I mean. So it was a 4-star read for me in any case. I'm not going to go into great detail on them, but I also read a few volumes of manga from the library. I read volumes 1 and 2 of Demon Sacred by Itsuki Natsumi, and this were 4-star reads for me. I thought it was an enjoyable premise, and it's just unfortunate that the library does this quite a lot with manga, unfortunately, that it buys 1 or 2 volumes and doesn't finish the series. And it's something that I like reading, but I don't love it enough to want to pay for them to finish it. So I end up not finishing the series. So the same will be true of the next one. Spell of Desire by Omi Tomu. I got the first 4 volumes of this from the library, but again, that's it now. It's not complete. So again, they were 3-star reads for me, those ones. I didn't think the story was quite as strong as Demon Sacred. So moving on, I got a review request from an author for The Indelible Man by Cairo Marques. This is a short story, essentially, in a day in the life of this man who's going through some sort of psychological decision-making, various processes, looking at his past, his future. And I thought the premise and the idea were really strong, but unfortunately, this author does not seem to be a native English speaker, and that really came across in the prose. It hadn't been edited. I would say not at all. Certainly not by a native English speaker. It was very rough, and all I could give it was 2 stars because the state of the prose made it very difficult to read. So any good points about the story idea weren't coming across the way they should, because it was too distracting when you were mentally correcting pretty much every sentence. So when I went back to him with the review, I mentioned this to him, and I did suggest he gets it edited because I think that would make a huge difference. And I'd definitely be giving this book about a 3, maybe 3.5 if he did that. So we'll see if he does, but it might be worth checking out at that point, but it's not something I'd recommend in its current state. Next up, back to the library for 2 more. The Nakano Thrift Shop, again by Kawakami Hiromi, who previously wrote Miss Ice Sandwich, I mentioned. Sorry, no, I'm lying. It's completely different Kawakami. So Kawakami Miko wrote Miss Ice Sandwich, apologies. Kawakami Hiromi wrote the 2 that I'm about to talk about, so the Nakano Thrift Shop and Parade. So starting with the Nakano Thrift Shop, this was a 3-star read for me. I came to this author after having read Strange Weather in Tokyo, which I really enjoyed. And for me, Nakano Thrift Shop just didn't have quite the same magic as that previous book. It was not a bad story. It's an interesting character study of these people working in this store, but it just was missing that spark that I found in Strange Weather in Tokyo. The other book of hers, though, that I also borrowed that is a 4-star read for me is Parade. Now, this is just a novella, and it's almost a side story from Strange Weather in Tokyo, imagining the 2 characters from that book in just a general day that they spend together. This was quite a cute piece. It was an interesting and fun and imaginative story, and I enjoyed that as a bit of a spin-off going back to those characters. Popping back to NetGalley, I read London Theatres, the new edition by Michael Coveney. I previously read the original edition a year or so ago. I think that came out, maybe 2. And I was interested to see what they'd done in this new edition, in this new volume. And I think it is, the first book was good, but this is definitely an improvement. I mean, it was a 5-star read for me before, and it's still a 5-star read for me now. But in this new edition, they've included a number of theatres that were missed out in the first book, and which I think are a really welcome addition, because it just gives you an overview of some of the slightly quirkier theatres that weren't in that original book. So if you're interested in the West End and theatre history, it's a gorgeous volume, some lovely pictures, history of each of the theatres, key moments, key productions, and really a beautiful piece for a collector of theatre history, theatre memorabilia, anything performing arts related. Sticking with NetGalley, I also read Japan by Sato Takashi. And this is a travel book in a way, but it's kind of a more off the beaten track travel book combined with a photo book. This was a 4.5-star read for me. What I loved about this book, apart from the beautiful photography that's included, is it gave you suggestions of things to see and do that wouldn't be the primary focus of, say, a Lonely Planet or a Rough Guide. And just places to go out to nature, away from the city, off the beaten track, as I said. Once or twice I would have liked a tiny bit more practical information in it, but there was some information on how to get to places, and at the back there was a bit of suggested itinerary for traveling around and things. So it's definitely a worthwhile book if you're interested in visiting Japan and want to get out of Tokyo and the big centres. Next up from the library, I read the 3 books in Holly Black's The Folk of the Air trilogy, so The Cool Prince, The Wicked King, and The Queen of Nothing. I really enjoyed these. I gave book 1 4 stars, and I gave the remaining 2 books 4.5 stars each. So this is a story, again, of Fae and the fairies, and our main character, Jude, is a human who, for various reasons that we find out at the beginning, has lived most of her life growing up in fairyland. And the difficulties she faces being a human there, especially when a kind of contest for the throne erupts around her. I don't want to say too much more and spoiler it, but I thought Jude was a really strong, well-drafted character, as was Carden, the main male presence in the book. He was interesting because I liked that we didn't have too many excuses for his behaviour. He was just allowed to be who he was and to have flaws, and we didn't have to come up with an excuse to make him more palatable. So I think that was a great plus in this series. Going back to NetGalley, I read The Shortest Day by Colm Toibin. I always say his name wrong, I'm really sorry. And this was a 3-star read for me. This is essentially just a short story about an archaeologist. It's kind of a ghost story in a way. He's investigating this site on the shortest day of the year, and the ghosts aren't happy about him being there at first because it's an important day for them when they gather energy from the sunlight that comes in through the specially designed partition, and they're worried that he'll disrupt things. So yeah, it was interesting and engaging in some ways, but I kind of wanted more from it. When it finished, I was like, oh, was that it? You know, there wasn't anything more, nothing more exciting was going to happen, which is why it gets 3 stars for me. Of course, it was well written. He's a wonderful writer, but it was just lacking punch, I think, for me, and a sense of action and excitement. Next up, I read The Dressmaker's Secret by Rosalie Ham. I actually only literally just finished this one, so I'll be putting out my review on my blog tomorrow. This is an arc I got from Pan Macmillan, and I requested it because I had originally seen the movie of The Dressmaker, and then I'd come to read the book afterwards, and I'd loved the movie and reasonably well enjoyed the original book, so I was interested to see what the author would do with a sequel. For me, though, this was only a 3-star read. It's not a bad book. It's not badly written. All the characters, our favourite characters are back. But it didn't have the excitement of the first book for me. I found myself not really caring too much about what was happening, how the characters would sort things out. Whereas I was more invested, I would say, in the original story. The only plus is Sergeant Farrett, who is my favourite character, is back in the sequel and has a fairly predominant role, and I love him. So I'm really glad to see him. But otherwise, I just felt it was a lot weaker than the first book. As I said, not a bad book, but just not as stunning as that original. We're nearly there. So another library book now, The 10 Loves of Nishino. And this is another one by Kawakami Hiromi. I'll get the name right this time. And this was a 4-star read for me. This is a really interesting piece in that it's basically 10 chapters, and each chapter is the story of a woman who has been in love or loved by, depending on how you're going to look at it, Nishino, the main male character, looking at how their relationship started and how it progressed and ended. So it's a very interesting character study, and it considers the ideas of what is love. Does it have to be the same thing to all people, or can people have their own definitions of what they're looking for in a relationship? So really a worthwhile read and a great piece of contemporary Japanese literature, commentary on modern society and relationships and things. So I would recommend that one. The final NetGalley book for the month was a manga, The Witch and the Beast, Volume 1 by Kousuke Satake. And this was a 4-star read for me. The premise of this one is the main female character who's been cursed by a witch, and she is out to get herself uncursed / get revenge, depending on her mood. She's accompanied by a colleague, and at the same time there's this kind of society keeping magic and witchcraft and things in check in the background as well. In some ways this first volume is just setting the scene, and I feel there's a lot more to discover about what's going on both with the society and with them. But it was an entertaining initial story. The artwork, though not my favourite style, was still very legible and enjoyable. Even in the action sequences, you could easily tell what was going on. So if you like fantasy, slightly darker edged fantasy manga, then it's worth taking a look at it. Which brings me to my final book, once I've had a quick drink. So my final book for October is one I bought, and it is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. Now, V.E. Schwab is one of my favourite contemporary fantasy authors, and it's unsurprising then that I loved this book, and this is a 5-star read for me, and I would say it's actually my favourite book of 2020. I know we've still got a few more weeks to go, but I don't imagine reading anything more stunning in the meantime, so let's call it and say it's my favourite book of 2020. So this story is about Addie, who in France a few centuries ago, to escape a marriage she doesn't want, makes a deal with the devil / the darkness, depending on how you want to view him. Unfortunately, she's not very careful with the terms of the deal she makes. So she will live forever, but no one will ever remember her. And so we see her progressing through the centuries, plus in the current time, because in the current time, she suddenly meets someone who doesn't forget her when the door closes. And so they are kind of pursuing a relationship, trying to beat the devil, beat fate. There's a bit of a twist along the way. We also see how she's managed to survive through the centuries in these flashbacks, as we see how she coped with her new life and being on her own, not remembered by anyone. It's a really great piece. I mean, V.E. Schwab's writing it's just awesome. It's descriptive and poetic in a way, but it's such easy reading. You can just fly through it. Wonderful characters, really well realised, beautifully paced story that just kept me turning the pages. And it was a fairly large book, and I was desperate each night to read one more chapter, but I had to go to bed because I had work the next day. And so I really loved it, and it's definitely one I will pick up again when I ever get time to do rereads, because I would like to give it another read. Definitely, though, it's a very strong book. If you're already a fan of V. Schwab's other works, such as like The Vicious Vengeful or Shades of Magic, then you'll definitely love this. And if you're new to her, then this is anywhere is a really good place to start with her, actually, because I've not read a single thing of hers I haven't liked. There's some I love more than others, but it's all been good writing and great stories. So definitely highly recommended. If it sounds like your sort of book, I really highly recommend you check it out. You've got, cursed people, devils, deals with the devil, Faustian deals. So it's really great read. On that note, I'm going to end. I've got a few things lined up to read at the moment. I've got a few just received from NetGalley in the last week or so, plus a few I have from the library, some more contemporary Japanese literature mainly for the library books. So I will come back again at the end of next month to tell you about those. I'm tracking quite well on my Goodreads reading goal as we head into the last 2 months. I've read 221 books so far. So I have 29 to go. So I basically need to read about 15 a month through November and December to complete the goal, which hopefully will be doable. We'll see, but I shall certainly do my best to make it. Since I did up the goal from 180 to 250, I better make sure I get to the finish line now. So I'll be back again, as I said, next month with another of these vlogs. In the meantime, I will of course have my pre-planned content, a couple of videos coming during November for you as well. So I will close there, but bye for now, everyone, and I will see you again very soon.